Welcome back, capital F football fans, to the O&O Sports YouTube channel. Today we are going over our preview and predictions for what should be a very important week 7 of the 2024 college football season. As always, be sure to like and subscribe, and just as a reminder, we have our $100 giveaway going for the season. Be sure to follow us on our social medias for a chance to win. And without further ado, let's jump into some games to watch this weekend, starting with Washington at Iowa. This game is going to be very similar to Washington's matchup against Michigan last week, but as ironic as it may sound, Iowa's quarterback situation is a bit better than Michigan's. The game plan for the Huskies should be more of the same: limit the run and force the pass, but expect Iowa to keep this game close at home. Next, we have Wisconsin at Rutgers. Rutgers is going to be the better team on paper in this one, and they'll get to play it at home, but Wisconsin is coming off a pretty big win over Purdue last week, while Rutgers is coming off a sloppy loss to Nebraska. So it'll be interesting to see which versions of these teams will come out to play this week. Next, we have South Carolina at 7th ranked Alabama, and oh boy, what do we have here? Both teams are coming off pretty devastating losses, but Alabama is leagues ahead of South Carolina this year, and that should be very clear in this one. South Carolina has the defense to stay in any game this season, but their offense is going to need to have a Vanderbilt type performance, as weird as that may sound, in order to make this a game. Next, we have Louisville at Virginia. These teams are in two polar opposite lanes right now. Virginia's got a lot of momentum going in their favor off back-to-back wins over Coastal Carolina and Boston College, and they meet their toughest opponent yet this week in Louisville, who is coming off back-to-back losses to Notre Dame and SMU. Louisville is going to be the better team on paper this week, but it will be played on the road against a Cavalier team with a lot of wind behind their sails. Next, let's look at Cal at 22nd ranked Pitt. We have an all-time ACC classic matchup in store here. The Calgorithm coming off a near upset victory over Miami, going to undefeated Pitt. This year really has been insane, but both of these teams should be coming into this one with a lot of fire. If we can get the Cal we saw last week in this game, it should be quite the battle. Next, we have Arizona at 14th ranked BYU. BYU is a pretty clear favorite in this matchup, but Arizona is the hottest and coldest team in football. If you look at their past 3 games, we see a loss to Kansas State and then a win over Utah, followed by a loss to Texas Tech. And that leads us to BYU, and if the pattern continues, this would be a massive win for Arizona. Next, we have Florida at 8th ranked Tennessee. Like the last matchup, Tennessee is the clear favorite in this game, but Arkansas did expose the formula for beating the Volunteers. The biggest question here is, will Florida be able to replicate that formula effectively enough to beat the Volunteers on the road? And our answer is going to be no. Arkansas is a much better team than Florida, and we think Dylan Sampson is going to have a field day against that Florida defense. And next, we have Vanderbilt at Kentucky. If you think back a week ago and then take a look at this one, you may think, oh, this one's going to be Vandy by a mile. But this is no small task for Vanderbilt. They're traveling to Kentucky to play a gritty Wildcat team with a defense that hasn't allowed a lot of success on the ground this season, which will be the Commodores' main point of attack. Expect this one to be very, very close. And last in our games to watch, let's look at our group of 5 highlight matchup: Marshall at Georgia Southern. Both of these teams are at pivotal points in their seasons, heading into the bulk of Sun Belt Conference play. For Marshall, you have to be ecstatic with the win over App State, but now you're facing a Georgia Southern team on the road that's shown they're capable of putting up big scoring performances when they need to, and we think this game is going to end up being one we look back on as a key win for either of these teams come the end of the regular season. And with the games to watch out of the way, let's look at our big impact matchups for this week, starting with the game tonight. It's the 16th ranked Utah Utes going to Tempe to take on the Arizona State Sun Devils. This one is going to be interesting for a few reasons. First of which is Arizona State's ability to run the ball. They've been one of the nation's top run offenses in terms of volume, and they've been pretty efficient to go alongside that volume, especially lead rusher Cameron Scatabo, who's averaged 5.5 yards per carry so far this season. But they're going to be facing a Utah defense that barely allows over 100 rushing yards per game. So it really will be a case of unstoppable force meets immovable object. But the second most interesting part of this game will be the presence or lack thereof of Cam Rising. He has been questionable for what feels like 10 years at this point, and if he's unavailable, suddenly this becomes a much more attainable win for the Sun Devils. Next, we have number 1 Texas taking on number 18 Oklahoma. It is the Red River rivalry. Had to take that one slow because it is very hard to say. And Quinn Ewers is back for the Longhorns, somewhat controversially. I mean, Ewers has been amazing, but Arch Manning has been a phenom in his absence, and they're going to be facing an Oklahoma team that's looking to turn the corner in this one. Michael Hawkins is the starter going forward for the Sooners, and he had a pretty respectable performance against Auburn last week, but more importantly, they were able to manufacture a solid performance on the ground against an Auburn team who hasn't been awful in rush defense so far this season, but Texas has looked like the more complete team through and through this year, and they're going to be looking for vengeance after suffering the upset loss in this one year ago. And next in our big impact matchups, let's take a look at 4th ranked Penn State going to Los Angeles to take on the USC Trojans. Penn State is going to be looking for a real statement win here over the Trojans to really cement them as a true contender. But the Trojans have shown us this season that when they're on, they can be a top 15 team as well. Unfortunately, they were not on last week against Minnesota, and that loss booted them out of the top 25 completely. But if you're looking for a way back in, there's no better route than upsetting a top 5 team at home. There's multiple routes to victory for both teams, but for Penn State, the main one is going to be trusting the run game. Katron Allen and Nick Singleton have looked amazing so far this year, and last week Minnesota put up nearly 200 yards on the ground against USC, so that should be the best formula for the Nittany Lions. But for USC, you're going to want to force this one into a shootout. Penn State's defense is obviously very, very good, probably elite, but Miller Moss has the capability to make big plays through the air at any given time. You're going to want to trust him with the ball here. Next, let's look at a top 15 matchup. It's 9th ranked Ole Miss traveling to Baton Rouge to take on the 13th ranked LSU Tigers. This one is very tricky because we know what both of these teams look like at their peak. For LSU, they're obviously going to pass the ball, but they've shown the ability to keep the ball on the ground and be very effective, especially with Caden Durham. Would like to see him get a good chunk of the touches in this one, but Nussmeier is who they want with the ball most of the time, and reasonably so. He has been one of the better quarterbacks in the conference this season, and for Ole Miss, it's been a lot of the same. They've looked a lot more effective on the ground than LSU, and Jackson Dart has looked very good when the offense is flowing and he can get into a rhythm. But both of these teams have been hard to predict because we never really can tell what version of these teams we're going to see. And the added effect of this one being in Baton Rouge makes it even trickier to predict. And next, we have 11 Iowa State going to West Virginia. This game is going to be huge for both of these teams. At face value, Iowa State is going to seem like the much better team here. Rocco Becht has been very reliable as their starter. They already have 3 different running backs with over 200 yards on the year, and the defense has been able to force bad performances from opposing quarterbacks. But West Virginia has been on a big upward swing the last couple weeks. They got a win over Kansas into their bye week and then beat down Oklahoma State on the road last week. And those wins have been primarily brought on by their rush offense. They rushed for nearly 400 yards against the Cowboys. And if you think back just a few weeks ago, Iowa showed us the best line of attack against the Cyclones is by keeping the ball on the ground, which West Virginia has shown they are more than capable of doing. And last in our big impact matchups, we have 18th ranked Kansas State taking on Colorado on the road. This one is pretty simple. Colorado is going to throw the ball and force you to make the same big plays back at them. And Kansas State is going to want to control the pace of the game, run the ball anywhere from 55 to 60% of the game, and punish you at the line of scrimmage. The momentum swings are going to be huge in this one, especially if either team can force big mistakes, turnovers, 3-and-outs, you name it. The best chance Colorado has in this one, and in almost all of their games, is getting started hot, going up by a score or two, and then mixing in a few 4 or 5 yard run plays into more big pass plays. But Kansas State looks like the better team here, and they're the most similar team to Nebraska that Colorado has faced since Nebraska. Will be interesting to see if Colorado can maintain their momentum in this one. And for your O&O Sports capital G game of the week, as always, you voted on it, and this week we have the 2nd ranked Ohio State Buckeyes going to Eugene to take on the 3rd ranked Oregon Ducks. And what a game we have in store here. Number 2 and number 3, I believe that is the biggest matchup we've seen so far this year in terms of actual AP poll rankings. The stats will be popping up on your screen for you to see, but for Ohio State, the plan should be the same as it's been for every other game so far, which is working the trenches, running the ball anywhere from 25 to 40 times a game, and letting Will Howard dink and dunk you to get into scoring range, and most importantly, trusting your defense. Dillon Gabriel's going to make big plays. Their rush offense hasn't been bad by any means, but you have the ability to contain them, make them get creative, and by forcing the issue with what is probably the best defense in the country. And for Oregon, you're going to have to beat Ohio State at their own game in this one. You got to play the field positioning, you got to mix in some heavy set run offense, turn out 3, 4, 5 yard runs, gut punches, and then trust Dillon Gabriel's arm. He's proven he's a good decision maker. He can make big throws, short throws, anywhere in between throws. But the key to this one is not throwing it with Gabriel 50 times. It's trusting Jordan James, trusting Noah Whittington, even Dillon Gabriel himself to churn out small runs, going into medium runs, going into those big runs late in the game. And for your players to watch in this one, it's going to be the running backs. For Oregon, it's Jordan James, 88 carries, 552 yards, 6.3 yards per carry, and 5 touchdowns on the season to go along with 9 receptions for 61 yards. And for Ohio State, we are choosing to highlight Quinshon Judkins because he has looked a little bit better than Travion Henderson, although those two are a massive 1-2 punch for the Buckeyes. He has 60 carries for 468 yards, 7.8 yards per carry, and 5 touchdowns, along with 5 receptions for 29 yards. And now let's look at Upset Watch with our good friend Todd. He's back this week. Everybody say hey to Todd. Thank you. And first, we feel like we have to do it. It's Alabama versus South Carolina, who is a 21.5 point underdog versus the Crimson Tide. And we feel like we have to include this one just in case. Todd does really like South Carolina this year because of that defense. So he's going to put this one at a 4 out of 10. But if you ask me, I'm not too worried about this one. Bama's going to be coming into this one pissed off, and they're going to be playing at home, but still, don't be surprised if the Gamecocks cover this week. Next, we have Notre Dame versus Stanford, who is a 23.5 point underdog. Stanford hasn't been great, but they've shown when they put together a somewhat complete game, they're capable of pulling off an upset. But Notre Dame's a much better team than Syracuse. No offense to any Orange fans that may be listening, but Todd would have to agree. He's got this one at a 2 out of 10 in the cold zone. And last in our upset watch, it's going to be Louisville at Virginia, who is only a 7.5 point favorite at home this week. This one is a lot more probable than the last two. Like we said earlier, Virginia is coming into this one hot, and it will be played at home. We haven't been super confident in the Cavaliers previously this year, but me and Todd both think that this one is pretty likely. So Todd has this one at a 9 out of 10. Louisville is in the danger zone this week. And now let's move on to our big impact predictions for this week. Here are all of our games going into week 7, starting with Utah at Arizona State. We're going to go out on a limb and say Cam Rising probably will not be playing this week, and that gives us a lot of confidence in Arizona State. Utah's offense has looked above average to mediocre without Rising, and we think with the kind of volume that will be thrown at the Utes on the ground, Arizona State is going to have a very good shot at winning this one at home. So give us the Sun Devils 20-13. Next, we have the Red River rivalry, Texas versus Oklahoma in Dallas. And sorry, Sooner fans, but these teams are just on 2 different levels right now. In the most bizarre circumstance where Texas falls flat with Quinn Ewers, can't get anything going on offense, I would assume they just bring in Arch Manning, who is a more dynamic threat as a quarterback and who has been just as good as Ewers to get the job done, but I don't even think it'll come to that. Give us the Longhorns in this one, 40-14. Next, we have Penn State at USC, and even though this one's going to be played in California, we trust the Penn State Nittany Lion defense to cause a lot of disruptions in the USC backfield. We think Penn State has the ability to control this one, and they're going to force it into a traditional Big Ten dogfight, which we think they will be the victors in. We like Penn State in Los Angeles, 27-14. Next, we have Ole Miss at LSU. While this one is very tough to get a read on, we are going to stick with our guns and trust Ole Miss here. We think they have a more diverse offense and a better overall defense that's more capable of throwing Garrett Nussmeier off his game. We like Ole Miss here, but in a close battle, 35-31. Next, we have Iowa State at West Virginia, and we like Iowa State a lot, especially on defense, but we think West Virginia is one of the hottest teams in the sport. They're probably going to be the toughest offense Iowa State has faced so far, and this one's going to be played in the great state of West Virginia. And with all that, we think West Virginia actually wins in an upset to knock off number 11 Iowa State, 31-28. Next, we have Kansas State at Colorado. We think Colorado's got some serious firepower on that offense, and defensively, they've actually been able to step it up after the Nebraska game, but the blueprint has been out on Colorado for a while. Both UCF and Baylor had the means to pull it off, but both teams fell apart to turn the tide in favor of the Buffaloes. We think Kansas State is a lot more stable than both of those teams, and on top of that, Dylan Edwards, former Colorado running back, now Kansas State running back, is going to look to have a big day against his former team. So give us the Wildcats in this one, 35-21. And for your O&O Sports game of the week, Ohio State at Oregon. Huge matchup. It's our preseason Heisman pick and Dylan Gabriel going up against our preseason national championship pick in Ohio State. And while we think Oregon has the means to keep this one within reach, we think Ohio State is just too dominant on both sides of the ball. They're going to be able to play how they want. I suspect Oregon has the ability to adjust their approach in order to match up better against the Buckeyes. But me and Todd both have Ohio State ranked number 1 for a reason, and they're going to prove it this week. Give us the Buckeyes 31-24 to round out week 7 of the 2024 college football season. And that's going to do it for our week 7 preview. Let us know what you think in the comments. And as always, be sure to like and subscribe. Your support is greatly appreciated on this channel. Be sure to tune in later this week for our week 7 recap. We will see you there.